Good afternoon. We're here for our weekly COVID-19 community briefing. I want to thank Deputy Mayor Owens for being with me today. Also, Police Chief Kenton Buckner is with us. And I want to thank the council again for allowing us the use of the chambers for these briefings. Just to go through the agenda real quick for the briefing, we will give a general update on COVID-19 related matters, give you the numbers, talk about crime, and Chief Buckner will be prepared to answer any questions following up. We'll give a few city service updates, talk about our city finances, quick update on the census, and just talk a little bit about heading into the holiday weekend. And then again, we'll open it up to questions. So let's start with the numbers. Again, as a reminder, County Executive will provide updated numbers at his daily briefing. So these numbers that I'm sharing are as of yesterday, May 21st. As of yesterday, 952 total cases in the City of Syracuse, 415 recoveries. That is 54% of the total cases in Onondaga County. Last week we were at 52%, so we continue to see that percentage go up. And as we've talked about before, largely due to high concentration of congregant facilities in the City of Syracuse, as well as continued proactive testing in the city. We continue to test every day at the Syracuse Community Health Center. We've had successful testing at the county WIC site over on the west side. We've been moving our way around the city this week. We are up on the north side. Today we are at Dr. Weeks Elementary on Holly Avenue, and people can go up there until 5 o'clock this afternoon for testing. And again, you can always go down to the Syracuse Community Health Center. But we're doing a lot of testing in the city, which is good. Also related to COVID-19, wanted to give a quick update on the reopening process. So we are getting more and more data from the state on businesses that have affirmed. Again, we expect to have an updated number later this afternoon. But as of yesterday, we had 669 businesses affirmed through the state's website for phase one. That's in the entire region. In the county, it's 484 businesses have affirmed in Onondaga County, and in the city, we have 138 businesses that have affirmed, and that number continues to go up daily. We, again, hope to get more regularly updated information, and we'll share that as we receive it, but it does appear that cities are responding and taking the right measures and getting reopened, which is a good thing. It's being done safely. Again, I want to talk about crime, and Chief Buckner can pick up on anything I miss, but we have been tracking crime during the pandemic, and we have seen and continue to see a steady decrease in overall crime. So year to date in this year, we are at 1,797 total Part 1 crimes. That's down from 1,875 the same time last year. That's as of May 18th. That represents a overall 4% year over year decrease in crime, which is again a good trend that we want to see continue. For some additional context, going back to the first briefing I did, we were at 7% 7% up in crime year over year. The following week we were at 2% increase. Week after that we hit 0. Last week we were at a 3% decrease in crime, and again this week we were at 4%. So that's a trend that we want to see continue, and I want to thank the community for your efforts in that regard. We continue to get dispatched for violations of the governor's executive order. Police department has been dispatched to 610 total calls for violations of the executive order. Breaking those down a little bit, that's 85 business violations, non-compliant businesses. That's up from 74 last week. And public gathering, social gathering, 525 total calls, and that's up from 444. An important note on enforcement of executive order violations: as of this week, non-compliant business enforcement, which to date had been dispatched to local law enforcement, in the case of the City of Syracuse, the Syracuse Police Department. Business noncompliance is now being directed to Onondaga County for enforcement. If there are still large gatherings at those businesses, the Syracuse Police Department will respond as needed. But if there's a business that's simply operating that shouldn't be, that enforcement will be handled at the county level. So we appreciate the county's partnership there. Looking at the call trends, over the last 7 days, we've seen 92 calls, and if you look at the previous seven days, we were at 36. And what we've realized is that those are largely dependent on weather, which makes sense. People want to be outside when it's nice, which is okay, but you can't be outside in a big group. And we are seeing that increasing as the weather gets nicer. And as you can imagine, that's a concern heading into a holiday weekend, and we'll talk more about that. Just to dive down a little bit more in the numbers, again, we talk looking at the CompStat report from this week, which comes out every Tuesday and is available on the Syracuse Police Department's website, syracusepolice.org. You see the 4% overall Part 1 crime decrease. Looking at violent crime and property crime, violent crime is down 11%, and property crime is down 2%. So really, the only Part 1 crime that is stubbornly staying in the above last year is our burglaries, although we've seen that number decline as well. And for some broader perspective, over the past 5 years, it's a 22% decline in crime compared to the last 5-year average. So again, good trends that we want to see continue. One more specific note on crime, again, as the weather has gotten nicer, we've seen some usual suspect quality of life issues come up. One that we've heard a lot about from our neighbors, and specifically within my Quality of Life Commission, when we had our first meeting a month ago, it came up, was illegal dirt bike and ATV activity in the city. Handled responsibly, in the appropriate places, dirt bikes and ATVs can be fun activities, but the city is not the place for these activities. We've seen very serious accidents. We've seen deaths as a result of accidents involving dirt bikes and ATVs in the city. We take it very seriously, so it is not only a serious public safety threat, it is a quality of life threat. The noise, the concern that we've heard from people having their kids outside playing and having these dirt bikes flying down the road. Starting last year, the police department established a special detail to deal with illegal dirt bikes and ATVs. They started that back up this year on May 7th. And since then, they've conducted 7 operations. And through those 7 operations, they stopped. They had 24 total stops. They seized 21 combination of dirt bikes and ATVs. They seized those 21 and issued 40 traffic tickets. So a lot of really good work. And again, it's both a very serious public safety issue as well as a quality of life issue, and we take it very seriously. I want to commend Chief Buckner and his team for really getting off to a strong start there and making sure our neighborhoods are safe. A few other city service updates. We have continued to look at our operations, look at the ways in which they're impacted by the pandemic, and look for better ways to deliver the services that we deliver. One of the recent actions that we've taken is converting our pedestrian traffic signals to no-touch crossings. So we have taken over 900 pedestrian buttons and reprogrammed them to no-touch. So what that means is you walk up to an intersection. Normally you would see the button, you would touch that to prompt the light to change and to give you a safe walk signal. That's been automated. So that 900 plus PED buttons amounts to about 90% of our signals. So we are very pleased with the efforts of DPW in making those changes. It ensures continued pedestrian safety and safety of all people by limiting the amount that they're touching these buttons and hopefully keeping people safe. It's a best practice in other cities throughout the country, and it's something that we're we are going to continue to look to convert. But again, right now, over 90% of our signals have been reprogrammed. So you will see temporary signage on them. So if you see the signs on the PED buttons, that means that you don't have to touch them. It's on a cycle, and you'll get that walk signal in a fairly short amount of time. Another adjustment we've made to city operations as a result of COVID-19 is we are introducing a curbside parking pilot program for restaurants and retail outfits in the city. We are starting the pilot program in two of our more popular and active restaurant and retail districts, Armory Square and Hanover Square. So this we're modifying parking signage to allow for people to be able to pull up, get their whatever they're buying, whether it's takeout from a restaurant or they've ordered something from a retail shop that they will bring out and drop off in the car. So you can see maps on the slide. We, again, are starting the pilot in Hanover Square on the 100 block of East Water Street. You'll see some new signage up for curbside pickup and drop-off. Along with that, we are also going to be closing East Genesee Street as it goes through Hanover Square. In doing so, we're hoping as things begin to open up, that will create more outdoor seating for the restaurants there and allow for more social distancing. In Armory Square, we are modifying the signage on the 300 block of South Franklin Street, and that new parking is scheduled to go into effect on Wednesday, May 27th. Depending on how those pilot programs go, we are looking at other neighborhood business districts where we will implement additional curbside parking. And that's really part of a broader effort that we've undertaken, really reimagining city-owned right-of-way and looking at how we can use it in creative ways to assist our constituents, to assist our businesses in accommodating the changes that have to be made as a result of the pandemic. So I mentioned as an example, East Genesee Street being closed down in Hanover Square for more outdoor seating. Again, we want to look at other areas where that can be done, whether it's additional usage of sidewalks, in some cases street closures, whatever we can do to help support our businesses and to create a safe environment for people to frequent those businesses. So we should have more updates on that in the coming weeks, similar to how we've done in our parks previously in closing some of those loop roads. We want to make sure as some of these public spaces are seeing more use, we can make sure that they're being used in safe ways. We mentioned last week a big project at the intersection of Martin Luther King Boulevard and South Salina Street. We had to turn off water for a number of surrounding properties on Wednesday. That started at 9 a.m. The service was returned for most of those customers by 5 p.m. that same day. There were a few that remained into yesterday, and the remaining 9 properties were restored at 9 p.m. So I want to thank the neighbors for their flexibility and patience as we work through this very important infrastructure improvement. I want to thank Deputy Mayor Owens for responding to some concerns that people had, understandably, about the lack of access to clean water, especially during the pandemic, and with the support of a number of our colleagues in the Parks Department and the Water Department, and through the support of the Food Bank, we were able to deliver cases of water for residents to make sure that they didn't go without, even for a short period of time. So thank you, Deputy Mayor, for that. There is going to be some ongoing work through the weekend into next week involving sewers and also some utilities, specifically with Verizon. So that should be done, we expect next week, but that intersection will remain closed into next week. We've talked every week about the financial situation within the City of Syracuse, the significant revenue losses that we've already seen and expect to continue to see, and how that may impact city operations. Those numbers continue to evolve. We continue to advocate aggressively for federal aid to help us mitigate the significant negative financial impact that we're seeing at the City of Syracuse. While I remain cautiously optimistic that we will see federal aid, every day that goes by makes it that much more difficult to to account for these revenue losses. So we can't hold our breath. We have to plan for the terrible possibility that we may not receive aid, or that we may not receive it soon enough. I talked about how we established a financial contingency committee to start working through different contingency plans. Just a quick update on that. As a start, and again, the numbers change daily, we tasked our department heads to identify $25 million in savings, anticipating continued revenue loss. It is an extremely difficult exercise, but I want to thank our department heads for stepping up and helping us with that. As of noon today, they've all delivered their contingency spending plans. Again, the overall target was $25 million. We asked them to address that in phases. So first, we challenged them to look at ways in which they can increase efficiency, so basically delivering the same services using fewer employees and fewer resources. The next phase would be reducing capacity, so some services would remain, but decrease in quantity, quality, or frequency. And then the final phase would be eliminating services completely, prioritizing what services we will continue to deliver and ensure safety and well-being. This is an exercise that I hope to never have to go through. I know the department heads felt the same way, and we hope we never have to implement it, but I wouldn't have undertaken this exercise if I didn't think that there was a possibility that we may have to continue to make these difficult decisions. Our Financial Contingency Committee is meeting on Tuesday of next week to go through the department plans. And again, as we continue to wait for federal aid, we will, as we approve those plans, we'll look, unfortunately, to begin implementing them in lieu of federal aid. In addition to the revenue losses that we've talked about that are creating this environment, it's being compounded by the fiscal pressure that the state is facing. So as an example, we receive state aid payments in the total amount of a little over $71 million we receive in state aid, or AIM is what is the acronym. The state's fiscal year begins April 1st. Ours begins July 1st. So the state's first payment in their fiscal year, which coincides with our last payment of our fiscal year, is scheduled for June and is scheduled in the amount of $61 million. And while we haven't received any formal confirmation from the state, we have received some indications that that $61 million payment could be delayed, which will, at a minimum, create some cash flow challenges for us in the short term. On top of that, we've heard the governor talk about the possibility of a 20% cut to our total AIM payment. So again, a little over $71 million total payment, 20% cut. That's over $14 million that we may have to do without. So those are some of the factors that are contributing to our focus on identifying those $25 million in savings, but that number could easily go up as conditions continue to change. We've talked about the connection between the census and why we talk about the census every week, because it does have such a direct impact on how we receive federal aid. Much of the federal aid formulas are based on the census. So the good news is we have continued to see our self-response rate go up. This week we're up to 47.7%. That's up from 46.8% last week. But as you can see in the chart, Syracuse is the orange color. We are very much in the same area as our upstate counterparts, exactly the same rate as Buffalo, slightly higher than Rochester, and just a hair lower than Albany. But then you see at the top the white line, which is the New York State average at 54.6. What explains that is that in these larger cities, we have a higher concentration of what are considered hard-to-count populations. And so it's always going to be more difficult for us to be able to keep pace with the state, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying, and we're trying very hard. We've modified our census outreach strategies to account for some of the challenges that we're seeing related to the pandemic, but it's never been more important for people to fill out their census. So anyone that's watching now, please, if you have not filled out your census, go on 2020census.gov, fill out your census form. You do that, nobody's going to be knocking on your door this fall, and you're doing your part to help the City of Syracuse and to help your community to get the critical federal aid that we need more so now than ever. So as I mentioned, we're heading into a holiday weekend, and I just want to share a few messages. First and foremost, to be safe. We're all missing our family. We're all missing our friends. And I understand, especially in Syracuse, when the weather's just starting to turn, we all want to be outside and we all want to be together, but now is not the time for that. You have seen that the state has made some changes. So as an example, the state did authorize church gatherings of 10 or less people with safety precautions. So while that has changed, and we're certainly happy for our communities of faith that they have that ability to gather, that does not mean that other gatherings are authorized. Other public gatherings continue to be prohibited. Where we're going to be keeping a close eye this weekend is on our parks. We have seen an increased overall usage in our parks, which is okay. Again, that's why we closed some of our roads, and we see a lot more people walking and running and biking, which again is wonderful. But it has to be done safely. People need to bring their masks with them. Anytime you're anywhere near someone, you should be wearing that mask. And again, that's all you should be doing at our parks. All of our buildings and facilities continue to be closed, with the exception of our tennis courts and our golf courses. Playgrounds are still closed. Again, buildings, other facilities closed, pools closed. So now is not the time to show up at our park for a barbecue. Again, we're going to be out there keeping an eye on things with our Parks Department and the Police Department. So if you can get out and use our parks safely, I encourage you to do so. But again, now is not the time to have a party. I also want to remind everyone that, again, testing will continue to be available through the weekend. I mentioned Dr. Weeks Elementary up until 5 o'clock over on Holly Ave today, and the Syracuse Community Health Center will be operating tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So as we take a break from work, think about maybe whether or not you want to run out and get yourself tested as we continue to try to get those numbers up, so we have a better sense of what the virus is actually doing here in our community. A few other things about this weekend and in the coming weeks. I talked about biking. Today is May is National Bike Month. And we have seen more biking in the city, which is great. We're trying to continue to improve our bike infrastructure. You may have seen, if you visited some of our parks, I talked about it a couple weeks ago, that we've brought our bike share program, the Gotcha Syracuse Sync bike share, into some of our parks, Upper Onondaga Park, Burnett Park, and we're seeing those bikes being used. They are under an enhanced sanitization schedule, and so we encourage people to get out. Biking as a safe way to get some socially distant exercise. Finally, I think it's important that we be mindful of what this weekend is all about and why it's a holiday weekend. I have really grown to value the tradition in the city of Syracuse of having our Memorial Day parade in Eastwood on James Street. I'm certainly going to miss that this year. It's going to feel a little bit different to all of us. But while we may not be able to be together, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take time to reflect on those that have given their lives in service to our country. So I am going to take some time with my family to do our own little observance in honor of those that have served and fallen, and I would encourage all of you to do the same in a way that's appropriate and that is safe. And again, I want to thank everyone who has served in this country, and my thoughts and prayers will always be with those that have given up their lives for our country and for their families. Before I open it up to questions, I'll look to the Deputy Mayor if there's anything that I missed.
Just to reiterate what the mayor said, Memorial Day is the official kickoff to summer. Just be safe, Syracuse. make sure that you're enjoying the sun, but you're doing it at a safe distance, publicly wearing a mask, as we remember those who served our nation and gave their lives. Let's also remember during this troubled time all of the people who have succumbed to this horrible virus. Remember them, their families, and the best tribute you can give on this Memorial Day weekend is to be safe, to do so remembering our first responders and our health professionals who are still working while we're relaxing. So please, Syracuse, keep that in mind.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Chief, anything you want to add before we go to questions?
A couple of things. First, in the vein of safety, I would ask the community to be sure that we're responsible as far as our alcohol consumption is concerned. We will certainly be out and be diligent about looking for individuals who are operating vehicles under the influence. So be very, very careful and safe about that. And then earlier, we did not have an opportunity to be able to recognize the officers who had paid the ultimate sacrifice from the Syracuse Police Department. So we want to remember those families that we have not forgotten 11 individuals who have paid that sacrifice in our community. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chief. Questions?
We are 1 week into phase one. Give us an idea of what worked and what was down.
Yeah, I think overall it's been phase one, the launch of phase one, and again, the question for those that didn't hear it is we're a week into phase one of the reopening process, and the question is how do we feel like it's going? I think generally speaking it's going well. I think that I talked about the number of businesses that have affirmed, and that number continues to go up, which is good. It shows compliance and that people are taking this seriously. Again, we have 138 businesses just in the city of Syracuse that have affirmed as part of phase one. I think the challenge for all of us, elected officials included, is just there's a lot of nuance in these rules and regulations. There's a lot of, you can't account for all the different variables. So we have continued to get questions from businesses, some that are in phase one, making sure they understand the process to get certified. Some that aren't in phase one and trying to figure out where they fit in. That's a big part of what we do with the regional control room process is field those questions from our constituents, send them to the state through that process, and try to get clarification for our constituents. So, as I've said from the beginning, there's no instruction manual here, but I think all things considered, we've put a good process in place. It's a data-driven process that continues to look at our health data to drive our decision-making. And while we have seen some of those numbers shift, we've talked a lot about the hospitalizations and what's happening with that number. But overall, when you look at our dashboard, we continue to be on track for maintaining our phase one, and as we head into next week and the end of next week, looking at phase two. So overall, I'd say so far so good.
One of the things that you talked about was the project over on Martin Luther King's line. I would imagine there's a lot less traffic. I know that infrastructure is something that you're keen on. I know that the previous mayor was also in the wheelhouse. Is this a time now with a lot less traffic that infrastructure projects can get looked at a little more carefully?
So the question is, for our infrastructure projects like the one that we have at the intersection of MLK and Salina, does the current pandemic and the fact that we have less cars on the road present opportunities for us? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is I wish it presented more. The reality is most of these investments are years in the making and require significant ramp-up time, coordination with other infrastructure investments. While anecdotally, there may be a handful of projects where it's been a little bit easier for us to mobilize and to get them done because of how quiet things are out there. The reality is, big picture, it's really hard to. We would have loved to have expedited more of those projects, but the good news is we're out there. I think on the flip side, given the fact that we have had to pause and that a number of city operations have been impacted by the pandemic, we're still able to fix our water pipes, we're still filling potholes, and we're getting into the road reconstruction season now too, and that will be in full effect. Dr. Weeks testing, again, Dr. Weeks is on Hawley Avenue. It started at 9 a.m. this morning and will go till 5 p.m. So the question is our overall testing strategy, and Deputy Mayor, feel free to weigh in if I miss it, but we have continued to be in close coordination with the county in deploying a testing strategy that gets into pockets of the community where we have concerns about under testing, and we have worked our way geographically around the region. The site, I think from the beginning, one of the best decisions we made collectively was getting that triage testing site at Syracuse Community Health Center, because it is so centrally located and generally accessible to the city population. But we still know that there are folks that walk and that bike, and so we want to get as close to them as we can. So that's why we were over on Gifford Street on the west side. That's why we're up on the north side. And heading into next week, I think we're looking at additional sites on the east side and on the south side as well. Well, I think that in terms of the specific cost of that reprogramming, I don't have a specific number for you now. That's all technology that was already in place, so it was just a matter of making that change. And I think in terms of the impact on spread, we're all continuing to learn about this virus, and we know based on what the health experts tell us, that the virus can linger on surfaces. We're still trying to figure out for how long and how long on what type of surfaces. But we know that the more we can minimize people touching things, the less likely we are to see additional spread. So that's what the decision was based on. Again, it was not a significant undertaking on behalf of the city, but it does, over generally speaking, increase safety as it relates to reducing touching, and also making sure the pedestrians are still safe as they cross streets.
So are you saying that change would have happened regardless of the pandemic?
Well, certainly the pandemic accelerated that process, and we're going to evaluate the process to determine whether or not it long term is the right thing to do. But it was the pandemic that necessitated or prompted the adjustment, and now we'll monitor and evaluate and determine what additional actions are required.
Do you have a status update for employees in the city?
So in terms of the employees that we have placed on unpaid leave, then we have not placed any additional employees on leave after the initial action that it impacted 104 employees. But we have actively been planning for the possibility of additional leave placements. We have worked very closely with our department heads and our labor leaders on that. And I think it's likely as soon as next week we'll see, as a next phase, likely a voluntary leave option for employees. So we'll have more information on that next week, but that's the next step.
Absolutely. We have had a long spring with families spending some quality time together. And the sun is coming out, and our little ones want to be in the sun just like we do. How we allow that to happen in a safe manner is what we're racking our brains about, not only the city of Syracuse, but again, I say this all the time, we have partners in this community who are just have the biggest hearts I've ever seen. So our philanthropic community, our not-for-profit community, all putting our heads together to think about what options, again, similar to the crossing light, we're looking at best practices across the nation to see what options can be available during the summer months. It is unreasonable to think that young people, particularly children, are just going to be inside all summer long. So we have to be able to strategically look at how that's going to happen. We know time is running out for us, and we're working hard on it. Our Parks Department, particularly our Commissioner Julia Fave, this is on her mind 24/7.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more on pools, we are spending a lot of time looking at our pools and what our options are. Unfortunately, that consideration around pools is impacted both by health considerations but also financial considerations. And as the deputy mayor said, we're running out of runway on both fronts. Given our fiscal condition right now and what we're seeing in terms of revenue losses, it is highly unlikely that without federal aid we would be in a position to open up our pools. And that pains me to say that, because as the deputy mayor said, we have young people, we have children in this community. That is where pools is really that's the highlight of their summer. That's their outlet. That's the release. And it breaks my heart to think that we might not be able to provide that enjoyment for them. And again, unfortunately, it's not just health. It's financial. On the health front, we are awaiting guidance from the state. You saw the state release some guidance on beaches and lakes, but we have not yet received guidance on pools. We have been told to expect it, and so we'll take that into consideration. We'll determine whether or not we think we can do it in a safe way, and then we have to figure out if we can afford it. I think in any situation, there's no scenario where we would be in a position to open up all of our pools. But I still hold out some hope that we can open up some of them, but I don't feel overly confident about that right now.
Chief, I've got a couple questions for you. This is a big weekend as far as the holidays approaching. In a situation like this, in a normal year, would you have more officers working than what you do this year?
Well, to be honest with you, when the weather is nice, every weekend is a big weekend for us, year-round, because the more people you have out, the more challenges you're going to face from a public safety standpoint. We certainly have taken strategic steps to try to do what we can to protect both the community and our officers, which means in some instances having enough officers on the street to be able to do the job, but also to hold some back to be able to pull from a reserve in the event of some kind of mass contamination of our officers. So we do have less officers on the street as a result of that, but with this being a holiday weekend, we certainly will probably be increasing that to ensure that we can address all the issues that may be coming.
How many officers are on the front line every day? How are you dealing with their mental well-being?
Well, it's tough. They have families, kids, like everyone else, and when they come to work, our first priority is to make sure that we have a safe working environment for them as they go out and try to protect the city. We want to make sure that they're wearing the appropriate equipment and that we're practicing social distancing and adhering to the things that our medical professionals are saying as well. I will tell you that the policing as a profession, there's a little bit of a well-known secret that a number of our officers are married to individuals in the healthcare profession, which puts us at a double, frontline scenario for us. So that's been a challenge for us. But we are doing everything that other first responders are trying to do to make sure that we stay on top of the things that are considered to be best practice during this pandemic. And then just to ensure that our officers are following the rules.
How many of your officers take advantage of that facility over at the Walmart in Syracuse?
I don't think so. The officers that we've sent, I believe we're up to 15 or 16 or so that we've sent to be tested as a result of maybe something that happened with a family member or with them having exposure potentially at work. But I'm not aware of a bunch of our officers going to the Walmart site.
We are currently working with the county to establish a specific testing protocol specifically for our first responders. So as we continue to ramp up testing, we are going to make specific accommodations for our first responders to make sure that they can get tested. We have seen a couple positive cases. I think, Chief, we have one or two in SPD right now.
We've had one officer, and we have another one that's out pending that is tested positive. He's doing good. He's still out. There's a period that we have to go through with the same recommendations that they would for anyone, and then we have certain procedures that we would ask them to go through before we allow them to come back into the workplace. Well, I don't want to go into specifics about a medical condition with an officer, other than to say that he did test positive. We immediately went into our protocols to have him removed, but physically he's doing pretty good right now.
We've also seen one positive case in the fire department, and that individual is doing okay. Thankfully, I think overall, as we've talked about before, when you look at how other first responders and departments have been impacted by the virus, we've fared well, and it's a huge credit to the policies and protocols that both the police department and the fire department put in place. But we know the virus is aggressive. We need to continue to keep our guard up, and again, we're thinking about those first responders that have contracted it, but overall, both departments have fared pretty well.
I'll open this up to any one of you. I know that the tendency is, given people tend to take a mile, as we relax different things week to week. Are you hoping that we don't see what we think we're going to see, and then people all of a sudden going, hey, it's open?
Yeah. I think in terms of how people are reacting to the reopening phases, I think in fairness to everyone, the decisions are being made daily. Circumstances are changing daily. So the rules in some ways are changing regularly. And so it's hard to keep up. So we have seen, when we started phase one, we got a lot of questions from constituents, from businesses. They were wondering, what does this mean? And I think anytime you even start to talk about, even before we hit phase one, just the discussion of a restart or a reopening triggered a lot of different emotions throughout the community, certainly throughout our workforce. I've tried to make sure that people understand that this process isn't about flipping a switch. It's about opening a valve, or think of a dimmer switch. It's a number of different analogies, but that we're going to have to continue to monitor the data, and that will impact how and when we can reopen. But yeah, I think just inherently human nature would suggest that as more activity happens, people are inclined to increase their activity and to let their guard down. And that's why we've continued to say now is not the time to do that. I mean, we're still trying to get a handle on the numbers, but I think most recently I saw from Upstate Hospital that the estimate is somewhere around 95% of our community has not been exposed to the virus. So we are very vulnerable, and reopening is about how we can get people back to work in a way that still limits the spread. It's not an either-or proposition. The goal here is to continue the reopening and restarting process while still at the same time limiting the spread and allowing the science to catch up to the virus. But it is absolutely something that we're worried about, and that anecdotally I think that we've seen, and that's why every chance we get, we reiterate how important it is that people keep their guard up. They continue to practice these safe and healthy practices that we talk about: washing your hands, wearing your face coverings over your nose and your mouth, social distancing. None of that should change.
They have been. We do our best to try to triage the calls that come in to make sure that we're responding to true emergencies where you need a police presence on the scene. When we have an opportunity to push those calls to either an online platform or teleserve, we do so with that. And then in cases where we actually have to respond to a location, we certainly want to practice social distancing. In some instances, we will have individuals to step outside rather than going into their home, making sure that we are wearing the appropriate equipment given some of the circumstances that we're dealing with. But we certainly have made a number restrictions for our officers or guidelines to help them during those moments.
Would you say the rate of dispatches to calls coming in has gone down?
Our costs of service are slightly down this year, I believe 4 or 5% or so. Costs of service are down 6% in comparison to this time last year. But again, we are in the warm weather months, so I expect for that to begin to turn and go to the other direction.
And then I also just wanted to ask, is overtime payment or overtime, you know, a lot of overtime, is that down at the moment?
Overtime is something that we're using sparingly. We do have some details to where we're having to put individuals out so that we don't take from the workforce that's responsible for our cost of service, but there are some details where we are utilizing overtime. Some of it, one of the common denominators has been businesses and then also juveniles. It's a very difficult thing to get your arms wrapped around with our juveniles. They have a lot of free time right now. As you could imagine, many of our residential locations are occupied. So I think that makes many of our businesses a soft target because some of them are not open. But those have been two of the common denominators. Juveniles reoffending when we actually have caught several doing so, and then actually breaking into businesses.
When you get into situations where you have large groups in your office that respond, are you kind of approaching it like, how do you break it up and give a chance or two, and then you have to come back a second time, or I would imagine you don't want to just automatically rush it as if there's you under arrest, you know, you want to give them a chance to split up, but you also want to kind of not escalate things by being too confrontational.
Well, we certainly don't want a confrontation. We prefer to, number one, we respond to all of the calls. And when we do make contact with the individuals, our goal is to educate and inform the individuals of what they should be doing in that example. Thus far, we have not been citing individuals for that. I can tell you that I feel like that we have been very gracious in how we have handled that, but that's been strategic. It's no secret that police departments have strained relationships in some sectors of our community, and we certainly don't want to do things to unintentionally add additional strain to those relationships. But we're also prepared that if we continue to see individuals where we're having to make multiple calls to a location and they're just not listening to what we're saying, that we may have to give citations for some of these violations, whether it be disorderly conduct, drinking alcohol in public, or whatever that may be, to get the individuals to move along. For the most part, I always describe the public and the police family is the vast majority do exactly what they're supposed to do, but we were created for the 2%ers.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a wonderful holiday weekend.
Thank you.